My name is David Winch. I'm a chartered accountant and a director in Bartfield's Forensic Accountants. And today we're going to be talking about confiscation and in particular the prosecutor's section 16 statement. Let's have a look at the agenda. We'll start off with some fundamentals. Then we'll talk about the section 16 statement itself. Get into the detail of the offence and the benefit of particular criminal conduct, sometimes referred to as the particular benefit. Moving on then to assumed benefit and other benefit in a criminal lifestyle case. Then the other side of the coin, we'll talk about the available amount of the defendant. And finally, the amount ordered to be paid and how we at Bartfield's Forensic Accountants can help. Let's get going. The fundamentals. Most importantly, confiscation is different. Confiscation is different from the trial. The focus in the trial is on whether the prosecution can prove to the criminal standard whether the defendant is guilty of one or more offences of which he's been charged. And the focus in sentencing is going to be on the harm done by the offences which have been proved, the culpability and role of the defendant, his previous convictions and personal history, his mitigation, and whether, and if so, at what stage he's pleaded guilty. But what's the focus in confiscation? It's not just something tacked on to the end of a trial, a sort of leftover bit that we can just deal with very simply. Confiscation has its own logic and its own focus. The focus will initially be on the benefit obtained by the defendant in terms of property. And don't forget, we're talking about the individual defendant. I have occasionally seen section 16 statements which try to deal with several defendants all in the same statement, lumping together the individual benefits of each of them, lumping together the available amounts of each of them, and trying to make a sort of combined confiscation order that will cover several people. That's not how it works. It works based on individual defendants, which could be a person, could be a company. And that benefit which he's obtained may include assumed benefit of his general criminal conduct over an extended period where the defendant has a criminal lifestyle. So we're not simply looking at the period over which he committed the offence of which he's just been convicted. We can be looking over a longer period than that. And we also have to look at the available amount of the individual. And of course, the available amount isn't relevant to trial, isn't relevant to sentencing, unless it's a fine. We mustn't forget that the initial burden of proof is on the prosecution. And that's true even where the criminal lifestyle assumptions are engaged. So where the defendant has a criminal lifestyle, in relation to the assumed benefit of his general criminal conduct, the prosecution first have to satisfy the initial burden of proof, and only then does it fall to the defendant in respect of each particular item to rebut the assumption or to demonstrate a serious risk of injustice if the assumption is applied. The section 16 statement is the prosecutor's first attempt to discharge his obligations in relation to the confiscation proceedings. And of course, it may be revised or supplemented by further section 16 statements from the prosecutor. Technically, they're under subsection 6. There are minimum requirements for a section 16 statement. You can find them in PoCA itself, or in the criminal procedure rules, or I should say, and in the criminal procedure rules, particularly Rule 33.13.5. So looking at the section 16 statement, after the introduction, the first issue I would suggest that needs to be addressed is whether the defendant has a criminal lifestyle, and if so, the reason for that. I do see section 16 statements which just assert that the defendant has a criminal lifestyle and don't explain why. So you really, in a section 16 statement, you should see a reference to one of the 4 potential routes under section 75 for a criminal lifestyle. The most common, of course, is that the offence is listed on Schedule 2. And then that's going to be followed by a narrative summary of the offences of which the defendant has been convicted. Relevant dates, and here I'm talking about the date of charge, which again, sometimes is not shown and needs to be. The date of charge, the date of conviction, and comments on any accepted basis of plea. Because if the Crown has accepted a basis of plea and has not restricted that acceptance, then that basis will also apply for confiscation. Now, in practice, what usually happens is that the Crown will say, we accept the basis of plea, but not for the purposes of confiscation, to give themselves a free hand later on. There will be, in the section 16 statement, some discussion of the role of this particular defendant in the offences, and mention of the sentencing and setting out the confiscation timetable. I have to say it's very rare in my experience to see a confiscation timetable actually adhered to all the way through, but nevertheless, it should be there in the section 16 statement. And then there will be information concerning what's been obtained as a result of a section 18 questionnaire and order, or perhaps as well as section 18A questionnaire and order in relation to a third party. Then there's usually a section on the defendant's personal history, his date of birth, his dependents, his legitimate income, his taxes paid, and so on. And if the defendant has a criminal lifestyle, there will be a section on his previous convictions, or there may be a section on his previous convictions and benefit obtained from those, and any previous confiscation orders. And previous confiscation orders are important, particularly where this confiscation is going to be on a criminal lifestyle basis. If the defendant has been subject to a restraint order, there's a section dealing with that, and appended to the section 16 statement, one would expect to see the relevant supporting documents. I always like, for example, to see an indictment, because I want to know precisely what offences the defendant has been convicted of, because that can have a bearing on his particular criminal benefit, and also can have a bearing on whether he has a criminal lifestyle. If there's been an accepted basis of plea that is relevant to confiscation, then I would want to see that there. Relevant sentencing remarks, if they're relied on by the Crown to show the role of this particular defendant in the offending. The section 18 or section 18A questionnaire and responses. The restraint order, supporting witness statement when the restraint order was obtained, and any variations to the restraint order. Very often there's a witness statement from HM Revenue and Customs showing the defendant's income tax returns and taxes paid and so on. And I think previous convictions should be mentioned in the section 16 statement, and previous confiscation orders, and perhaps, if we've got it, the database record showing the amounts of confiscation orders made, the payments received, and so on. Okay, let's talk about the offence and the benefit of particular criminal conduct. Here I'd expect the section 16 statement to refer back to the indictment and the specific offences of which this defendant has been convicted. And remember that the benefit of particular criminal conduct cannot be wider than the offence of which this defendant has been convicted. There's a bit of case law there on the slide. That was a case involving a gentleman who was in breach of an enforcement notice in relation to town planning. And his breaching of that enforcement notice continued over a period of months. I believe it was in relation to a property in multiple occupation. When he was charged, the words on the indictment referred to a breach on a single day. When the matter came to confiscation, the defence argued, and it was ultimately accepted by the Court of Appeal, that the benefit of his particular criminal conduct was limited to the benefit obtained in relation to that single day in relation to which he'd been charged. That also had the effect in his particular case that he didn't have a criminal lifestyle. So it had a major effect on the confiscation. Instead of several £100,000 of benefit, he had a benefit of about £50 or £60. And we know that the benefit of an offence is in the property obtained as a result of or in connection with that offence. But we've got to be rather careful about interpreting in connection with too broadly. The case there on the slide refers to a situation in which somebody had bought materials for the purpose of committing an offence. The materials were genuine materials. I think they were cardboard boxes in which he was going to stow tobacco, which was going to be smuggled and duty evaded. And it was argued by the prosecution that the property, the cardboard boxes and so on, had been obtained by him in connection with the offence of which he was convicted. No, said the Court of Appeal, those cardboard boxes were obtained for the purpose of the offence, but that does not make them obtained in connection with the offence. So the cost of obtaining those was excluded from the benefit of particular criminal conduct. So we've just got to be a little bit careful about what we mean by in connection with. Where we've got a drugs case, as is all too common, then we're going to need some sort of valuation of those drugs. That might be prepared by a specialist police officer with experience in drug valuation or whatever. In other cases, if we've got a piece of stolen artwork or something, again, we might need an expert valuation, and that valuer's statement should be appended to the section 16 statement. And don't forget that the particular benefit, the benefit of particular criminal conduct, can be uplifted for changes in the value of money. And if you're doing that, then one would expect to see computations and tables of CPIH appended to the section 16 statement. Right, assumed benefit. Now this, of course, is very often the most difficult area for prosecutors and indeed for defendants. Assumed benefit and other benefit. Of course, it's not obligatory to pursue every possible benefit. And the Crown may decide that pragmatically, they are not going to pursue every assumption. They're not going to pursue everything that might be possible benefit. We need to ensure that the relevant day is correctly identified and explained. And there are a couple of potential complications with the relevant day. The first is that the relevant day has to relate to proceedings for the offence concerned. And the offence concerned, if we look at section 85 and we look at section 2, the offence concerned is the offence that triggers the confiscation proceedings. So there can be occasions where a defendant is perhaps charged with different offences on different dates, and some of those offences might not be pursued or might not result in conviction. From the point of view of establishing the relevant day, we're interested in the offence which has triggered the confiscation, the offence of which he's been convicted, which is relevant to the confiscation. And if there's more than one date of charge, and therefore more than one relevant day, we have the earliest. But we need to be careful, as I say, where different offences have been charged on different dates, and not all of them have resulted in a conviction. Also, we need to be careful where the defendant has been the subject of a previous criminal lifestyle confiscation order within the 6-year period ending on the date that the current proceedings commenced. Have a look at subsection 9 of section 10, and you will see that the relevant day cannot be earlier than the date on which the last previous criminal lifestyle confiscation order was made. The logic of that is to avoid duplication and double counting. So sometimes the relevant day will be later than the day which is 6 years prior to the date of charge. Where we're relying on property transferred to the defendant after the relevant day, then we need to ensure in the section 16 statement that the property is transferred to the defendant solely or jointly, or we need to justify if, for example, the property is being transferred to a company and we're piercing the corporate veil, we need to explain and justify that. I've seen cases where perhaps money has been banked in a bank account belonging solely, let's say, to the wife of a convicted defendant. And the prosecutor has wanted to apply the statutory assumption to those deposits. Well, if he's going to do that, he's got to show that that was property transferred to the defendant. It's not sufficient to show that it was property transferred to the defendant's wife if she's not been convicted. Now, it may be in the circumstances it is possible to say, yes, this money came via the defendant into his wife's bank account, but that needs to be explained and justified in the section 16 statement. Do please append copies of the bank statements. We've said that the initial burden is on the prosecution, and it is the bank statements themselves which are the evidence that property has been transferred to the defendant where we're dealing with credits to a defendant's bank account. So we absolutely need to see the bank statements. We also are going to want to see copies of any spreadsheets that are relied on, but we need the bank statements and the spreadsheets to be appended to the section 16 statement. Obviously, when you look at those bank statements and you prepare your spreadsheets, you are going to need to exclude demonstrably legitimate receipts. And you're going to exclude transfers between different accounts belonging to the same defendant, because he's not receiving property there, he's simply shifting property from one bank account to another. And similarly, if we've got things like direct debits that are bounced and result in a credit, then those credits, of course, are not property transferred to the defendant. They're simply the reversal of a debit. So they need to be excluded from the assumed benefit. Where we're relying on property held by the defendant after the date of conviction, then we're going to want to see attached to the section 16 statements copies of relevant documents showing ownership solely or jointly by the defendant. So if you're talking about land and buildings, then we're going to see land registry documents typically showing the ownership by the defendant of the property that we're talking about. We're also going to want valuations of those properties, current valuations, because we're looking at property held by the defendant after the date of conviction. And again, we need, where we recognise, where the prosecutor recognises demonstrably legitimate interests of third parties, then they are going to need to be excluded from the value of the property held by the defendant after the date of conviction. Moving on to expenditure incurred by the defendant after the relevant day. Again, we need to ensure that that expenditure is incurred by the defendant solely or jointly, or to justify the use of the assumption if it's not straightforwardly incurred by the defendant. And we're going to want to append copies of documents relied on, such as receipted invoices. I have seen occasions where expenditure from a known bank account has been treated as assumed benefit under this head. That's obviously not correct, because the credits of money into that bank account will be dealt with by the assumption of property transferred to the defendant. The expenditure is from a known source. So we shouldn't be including that again under the expenditure assumption. And in all cases, we need to be careful to exclude items which have already been included in benefit under another head. That can sometimes be a little bit tricky, but clearly items can only go into benefit once. And the benefit may be uplifted for changes in value of money, applies to the assumed benefit as it applies to the benefit of particular criminal conduct. And again, we need the CPIH table and the computation. Where a defendant has previous criminal convictions, and they can be established on a balance of probability, the benefit of those previous criminal convictions may be included within the benefit of general criminal conduct where the defendant has a criminal lifestyle. Now, this is because a defendant's general criminal conduct is all his criminal conduct. So the benefit of all his criminal conduct can come into a criminal lifestyle confiscation. So if we know, for example, that a particular defendant has been previously convicted of a theft of £1,000, let's say, and there was no confiscation at that time, then that £1,000 is part of his benefit of his general criminal conduct. Where a defendant has been subject to one or more previous confiscation orders, the benefit found under those orders should be included within the benefit of the defendant's general criminal conduct in a criminal lifestyle confiscation. That is important, because if you do not include the benefit of a previous confiscation order in a new general criminal conduct confiscation, then effectively you're going to lose it. But a deduction should be made from that benefit equal to the amounts ordered to be paid under the previous confiscation orders. Where the defendant has previously been subject to a criminal lifestyle confiscation order, any benefit which arose prior to the most recent criminal lifestyle confiscation order, but was not included in that order, must be ignored. And then you need a summary table of the defendant's total benefit to assist the court. Let's talk a little bit about jointly obtained benefit. Where the defendant has obtained benefit jointly, whether it's particular benefit or benefit of general criminal conduct, details should be provided. And it may be convenient to include a table of jointly obtained benefit showing the value of each benefit jointly obtained and with whom it was obtained jointly, if you know. Right. That's sorted benefit. Now, what about available amount? Well, strictly, the burden on the defendant is on the defendant to establish on a balance of probabilities that his available amount is less than his benefit. But as we know, in practice, the Section 16 statement will include information on the defendant's available amount. And that will be derived from the criminal investigation, from the Section 18 response, any Section 18A response, information obtained from production orders, and information from HM Revenue and Customs and the Land Registry. You need to exercise some caution with regard to open source property valuations, things like Zoopla, based on a previous market price and an index of market property prices, since they don't reflect the condition of the individual property that you're concerned with. Secured liabilities, such as outstanding mortgages, should be deducted from the value of the asset on which they are secured. Obviously, if the secured liability is greater than the value of the asset, then you're just left with a zero, but you don't take the excess secured liability off other assets. The reason that you're taking a secured liability off is because the lender has an interest, in the legal sense, an interest in the property on which it's secured. And you are only interested in the available amount in dealing with the defendant's interest. So obviously the defendant's interest is reduced by the amount of the lender's interest. Where the defendant is a joint owner of property, only the value of the defendant's interest in the property falls within his available amount. Whether any gift by the defendant is a tainted gift to be incorporated within the defendant's available amount generally depends solely upon the date on which the gift was made. There is one exception to that in relation to criminal lifestyle cases where a gift has been made prior to the relevant day, but is of property which is derived from the general criminal conduct of the defendant. But that's the only case in which the source of the property gifted is relevant. Any supporting valuations should be appended to the Section 16 statement, of course. And where there is information that suggests that the defendant has additional hidden assets, that information should be included in the Section 16 statement. Any information to assist the court in making a Section 10A determination of the defendant's interest in property should also be included in the Section 16 statement. But don't forget that the court does not have to make a Section 10A determination in arriving at the defendant's available amount. It can simply say, the judge can simply say, right, I'm going to take 50% of this asset and include it in my calculation of your available amount. And he can do that without making a determination under Section 10A. If he does make a determination under Section 10A, then there are further formalities to go through before making that determination. He's got to give the third party who has an interest an opportunity to make representations to him before making a formal determination. So in most cases in practice, you will not be asking the court, I suspect, to make a formal determination under Section 10A. Then we should have a summary of the defendant's total available amount. Quite simply, the recoverable amount is the lower of the benefit and the available amount. But that's not quite the end of the story, because the amount ordered to be paid may be the recoverable amount, typically is the recoverable amount, unless it would be disproportionate for an order to be made in that amount. And this is where we start talking about the case of Weyer, and where property has been returned to a victim. So strictly speaking, that reduction as a result of property being returned to a victim is a reduction in the amount ordered to be paid. It's not a reduction in the benefit obtained by the defendant. It's a reduction which is made right at the end of the process when you've established the amount of benefit, you've established the available amount, you're looking for the recoverable amount, which is the lower of those two figures, and then the court asks itself, would it be disproportionate to make an order that the defendant pay the recoverable amount? And at that point, Weyer comes in, and the amount ordered to be paid If it would be disproportionate to order the defendant to pay that full amount, then the amount ordered to be paid is the largest amount which would not be disproportionate. So there's a reduction in the amount ordered to be paid as a result of the proportionality. And you can see the legislation in subsection 5 of section 6. Then your section 16 statement will wrap up with some concluding points dealing briefly with the effect on the courts of the powers, any request for a compliance order under section 13A and the reasons for that request, the address for the defendant's response, a note concerning the potential implications of acceptance of allegation by the defendant or of a failure to respond. There's typically a mention of Regulation 11 of the Criminal Justice and Data Protection Protocol number 36, Regulations 2014. And then a note regarding time to pay, and we know what that is. Strictly speaking, the first position is that the confiscation order is payable immediately, but up to 3 months can be initially allowed as time to pay. And as we know, the defendant can come back and ask for a further 3-month period. And then a note regarding default sentence, and we're talking about now section 35(2)(a), which was inserted in 2015 with the new default bans to be used when a confiscation order is made. Okay, and that then is your section 16 statement drafted and completed with all its supporting appendices. How can we help? Well, Bartfield's Forensic Accountants remains fully staffed. We're undertaking legally aided and privately funded criminal work and civil forensic accountancy work, both for defendants and for the prosecution. It's relatively easy for us to conduct the bulk of our work remotely using up-to-date and secure IT facilities. And we are readily contactable by phone, email, and online. Our website, which I would commend to you, is full of useful information, and of course that is accessible 24/7. And you can find more on this topic on the website, and this and previous webinars can also be found on the website, and the link there is on the screen for you. We're going to be sending a free recording of this webinar to everybody who's enrolled for it. And we'll deal by email with any questions that you may have arising from the seminar. The email addresses are on the screen. Thank you again for your time. I hope you found this useful. In a fortnight's time, we will be looking at the response from the defendant to the section 16 statement and what we expect to see in that response and how it takes matters forward. Thank you again for your time. See you in a fortnight. Thank you.